Welcome to the BookWorthy podcast, where we talk about kid lit that's good for your kids' hearts and souls. Today is a special bonus episode. I'm always looking for new ways to point my kids to Jesus, so today we're talking with Glynis Nilles, the author of the 'Twas the Season series. Her latest addition to this series is the 'Twas the Season of Lent. This is a 40-day devotional and storybook that explores the life, words, and works of Jesus and encourages families to draw close to God during the Lenten season. Since Lent starts here in a couple of weeks, on Valentine's Day actually, I thought this would be the perfect book to highlight as we start to prepare for the celebrating of Easter. Welcome to BookWorthy, Glynis.
Thank you so much for having me, Valerie. I'm excited to be here.
It is a pleasure. But to start us off, Glynis, could you tell us what's your favorite part of the season of Lent?
My favorite part of the season of Lent is probably Holy Week. You know, that week immediately prior to Easter Sunday, because I guess that's the week when for most of us, we really start thinking about Easter and what it means and what Jesus did for us, because you have the Monday, Thursday, and then Good Friday. And so and then like Holy Saturday, which I always think, I know that's your traditional, let's go hunt for eggs. But in the biblical sense, I always think to myself, I wonder what was really happening on that holy day, did Jesus know when he was in the tomb what was going to happen? You know what I mean? It's like for me, that Holy Saturday, it's like a pause between Good Friday and Easter Sunday, and it's kind of a mysterious thing. So I think I'd just have to say Holy Week.
Most definitely. Yeah, it's one of those that Saturday is never really talked about much, and what was happening in that time between Good Friday and Sunday morning. But it's one of those kind of to relate to Jesus' second coming. I think we are kind of sitting in that same feeling of Holy Saturday. Is like we are waiting for Jesus to come again. We are groaning. We are worried. We are excited. Just that conflict of emotions, and it's kind of just reminds me that we are waiting for another Easter that's coming. That's so exciting.
Right. I love that analogy. I've not thought about it that way before, but you're right.
Well, what did you do in your home to make Lent a special season?
So, Valerie, I have 4 grown children and 4 little grandchildren. And I have to say that growing up, even like when I was growing up or when I was raising my children, Lent wasn't a thing for us in our tradition. I was raised in a Christian home by Christian parents, and obviously Holy Week was a big, thing that I remember. But the only real thing I remember about Lent, which I guess I must have passed on to my children, is, making pancakes on what we call Fat Tuesday, which marks the beginning of Lent when you use up all the fat in your home. That's where that tradition comes from. And so what I really remember about Lent is not really religious at all. It's flipping pancakes in my kitchen. And sometimes they would stick to the ceiling, And so that's just I don't know. I don't even really know how. I guess it's called Shrove Tuesday, and I must go back to my Bible and find out exactly, where that all comes into Lent. But that's what I mainly remember. I remember marking the beginning of Lent, but then Holy Week. And so all those days, those many days in between, because Lent is 40 days, it wasn't really part of my tradition. And so now that it is, I'm quite excited to be able to give it the same sort of respect and like preparation and waiting time that we do for Advent.
Yeah, it's one of those we do. There are a lot of church traditions around Advent and a lot of focus on that. And Lent kind of gets this back seat, even though Easter is kind of the reason we celebrate Christmas, right? And so it's interesting that it's kind of gone out of popularity this season before Easter, just with the secularization of the holiday and that kind of thing. What was your inspiration to do this 40-day devotional for Lent?
Well, to be honest, this book, I think you mentioned in your introduction, my inspiration really came from the prior 3 titles in the series. It began with "'Twas the Evening of Christmas." I'm just going to show you the covers here really fast because they're so colourful and evocative. The illustrator for all the series is Elena Selivanova. So this book was published, I think, in 2017. "'Twas the Evening of Christmas." And I just took the classic Clement Seymour poem, and I just thought it would be kind of fun to rewrite that using the same rhythm, the same meter, but write it about the birth of Jesus. And that's what kick-started this series. And then we followed that with "'Twas the Morning of Easter," which is Mary Magdalene's story, all about the resurrection. Again, written in the same vein. And then we brought out "'Twas the Season of Advent," which is 25 devotions to help us count down to Christmas. And so really, I guess it was this book that inspired "'Twas the Season of Lent," because it just seemed, the natural thing to, if we're going to, put focus on and celebrate the Advent season, and a great way to do that is by reading devotionals every day, then I really should think about doing one for Lent. So to be honest, that really was the inspiration, because the ball was just rolling and it seemed like the natural way to go with the "'Twas" series.
Very neat. Well, in your research or in your writing, what did you learn about Lent or about Jesus that really stuck out to you?
Well, that's a great question. One of the things I really love about the Bible is that even though, I've been reading that book for like 60 years or something, there is always something new that you learn about Jesus, even though you might have read the same passage many, many times. So I think for me, when I went back to my Bible, because this was quite an ambitious project for that "'Twas" series. The first 2 books were really just the rewriting of the poem. The 3rd Advent book was more detailed because that was 25 stories, but this one was 40. And so I had to go, well, first I always pray before I write anything, but going back to the Bible and really rereading the Gospels, and especially Jesus' message and why he came, and the enormous mystery of why he would choose to give his life for us. And so I think in doing that, there is always something new to learn about Jesus, or there's a new angle to take to the story. So I guess what I really learned, that I really took away, that I hope comes across when people read, is that Jesus had such a heart for people. I mean, and that might sound obvious, but he really came because he loves us, every single one of us, and no one is left out in God's great love, And so I don't know if that was a new thing I learned, but it certainly just became more evident and real to me. And that's what I really want readers to take away, that, for example, reading the story about, the paralyzed man who his friends brought him to Jesus and lowered him through the roof. They made that crazy hole in the roof. And in that story, I guess what I learned that was new is that man must have felt left out all his life, felt left out of parties or celebrating or going to places. He must have felt left out. And then when he encountered Jesus, he would never feel left out again. In the rewriting of those Bible stories, there are always new things to learn about Jesus and new angles to take, you know.
I love, I did a kind of a 40-day devotional PDF for those that are on my newsletter, and I loved walking through all those miracles and just to be like, okay, God really did see everybody. Jesus talked to the rich, Nicodemus.
Yeah.
He talked to the poor, just as the
Yeah.
paralyzed man you mentioned. And there's some miracles that just don't get very much light of the day, but like the widow of Nain and just people that
Right.
were grieving, people that were outside of the chosen people. But Jesus still said, I am here for you too. And it's just one of those just things that you're like, we all want to be loved and accepted and welcomed no matter who we are or where we are. And Jesus just shows that he does that over and over again in his word. And I love that your 'Twas the Season of Lent is going to do that. Just remind kids that they are seen, they are heard, they are wanted in the presence of God, because I think that's kind of what that God hole in our heart that we have. With the season of Lent being this 40 days instead of 20 days, I'm really proud of you for jumping into going from 25 days to 40 days. That's a lot.
Yeah.
But we don't spend a lot of time other than, Fat Tuesday and Ash Wednesday and Holy Week preparing for Easter in a spiritual sense. So what's the hope in this focused devotional for a 40-day preparation towards the exciting part in Holy Week?
Yeah. Well, it's a challenge, isn't it, Valerie? Because 40 days, it's a long time. It's a long time, especially if you're a child. The older we get, the faster time passes. But 40 days, it's longer than a month. It's a long haul. So my hope really, well, first of all, the stories are fairly short. What I did in the book was I always think it's helpful if you can break it down, In my planning, I had a chart and I would scribble all over it. So I just hope that it's doable for families. And one of the things in one of the stories, well, I wanted to tell people, don't worry if you don't get to read every day. Don't feel like you're a failure, because I think that's all part of Jesus' message. It's okay. If you forget one day, or if you get bored with it one day, or just put it down and then pick it up again when you're ready. So I don't want to there's no expectation for people, you have to stick at it for these 40 days. But what I hope is that the stories are fairly short, and the illustrations by Lena Selvanova are really lovely. They're beautiful. So I hope that they will capture the child's attention. But to kind of help, not with I almost said the monotony of Lent. I really don't want to say the monotony of Lent, the long haul of Lent, I mean. So I'm just going to show you one of her illustrations at the beginning of the book. So what I did was I broke it down into 4 sections, and so there are 10 stories in each section. And the first one, that one that I just showed you, all those stories, well, it begins with the poem, a section of the poem in the familiar rhyme. It begins like this. 'Twas the season of Lent, when for 40 whole days God's people were trying to think of new ways to be more like Jesus, to love, care and give, in hopes that they choose the right way to live. So that's how it begins. And then the first 10 stories are just all about the mission of Jesus. Like, what was Jesus' mission? Why did he come? And then the next section of 10 stories, hopefully it's doable because it's in smaller chunks. Mm-hmm. So after those 10 stories, then I moved to the message, so we know kind of what his mission was. What was his message? So then the stories, like the Sermon on the Mount and being a light in the world and what's important in the world. And then after that section, it's 10 stories about the ministry of Jesus. And that's when we come across all the wonderful people that you just talked about, the Jairus, the ruler in Jericho, he's in there. Or no, it wasn't Jericho, it was Capernaum. But Jairus, the synagogue ruler, he's in the book. Obviously, like his little daughter who Jesus healed, but the woman who crawled and touched Jesus's cloak, So all those characters that you talked about, whether the rich or poor, men or women, children or grown, they're all in that part, the ministry of Jesus, because his ministry was to all. And I really wanted to include women too, as far as I could. And then the last part, Valerie, which takes us obviously through Holy Week, the last 10 stories is about the mystery of Jesus, because it really is a mystery that Jesus would choose to give his own life. He had a choice, in that garden. He wrestled with that choice, and he said, in John's Gospel, I lay down my life for the sheep. No one takes it from me. I lay it down. And so that was a long answer, wasn't it, to your question? But hopefully that's what families and readers, because I don't think it's just for kids either. I feel like it's a nice book to put on your coffee table. I mean, don't leave it on your coffee table, but just think, what this season is all about and really what it leads up to. So I hope that doing it that way in the chunks, it'll be doable for people.
Definitely. And it's one of those things to encourage people that, especially with young kids, I have 2 that have ADHD. And so sitting down for a long period of time to do a study can be challenging. But it's one of those, I love that, taking a look at what's doable for your family, and whether it's just taking that "'Twas the morning of Easter" and just reading that poem, because even with the "'Twas the night before Christmas," we read that around Christmas, and it just is easy to read and short, but it's so lovable, and the illustrations that your illustrator has done are just so engaging and lovely that, whether it's taking it really small by just doing the poem or going a little deeper, which this "'Twas the Season of Lent" does. And I love that you've broken it up in really easy sections. And I think it is important to point out that even when we're doing any type of study with our kids, that it doesn't have to be every day at a certain time, but just organic, bringing Jesus into the living room, at the coffee table, just something that's easy to pick up and easy to be a part of the culture of our home. And I love that about your "'Twas the Season" books. Well, Glennis, I love that you've put together such a great book to sit down as a family and go through these devotions. What other resources do you have to go along with this book?
Oh, I'm so glad you asked that, Valerie. So in the works right now, there is, because I was a teacher in my previous life, I love to create free resources for families or children's ministry people. And so in the works is a free downloadable activity pack to accompany the book. And what it consists of, there are a signed book plate that you can print out and stick in the book. But there are also, there are 4 lovely colouring sheets. And what we did was we took those spreads that I showed you before, because each of the 4 sections has one of these full colour spreads in it that introduces the poem. Here's the one for the ministry of Jesus.
That's
so we
lovely.
took those 4 spreads and made those into colouring sheets. But then what I'm really excited about, and I hope will help with this countdown to Easter, is that my design team at Zonda Kids, they are the publishers, they are working on producing, it's like a printable 40-day countdown calendar path. It's a bit like so it's not like just a regular monthly thing where you check the boxes off. It's actually a little path that kids can trace, and it goes up to, it shows you all the Sundays in Lent, because of course Sundays are not included in the 40 days of Lent. And so that's an important little thing. I want your listeners to know that if you do use this book for your Lenten devotionals, take a pause on the Sunday. But if you start on Ash Wednesday and you read it every day, excluding Sundays, you'll reach Easter Sunday. And so that little path, it's just designed, kids can colour in each little square at a time, or maybe they can put stickers on. And Valerie, another little idea is that maybe if families do come up with any sort of extra like missional ideas, like, because I think Lent is a great time, not just to sort of pray more or read your devotional, but what can we do to join Jesus in this mission to the lost, the least, and the lonely? So I try to encourage that throughout the book. And so if families do come up with, okay, let's go and visit this relative, or let's make cookies for this neighbour, or let's go and help out at the soup kitchen, whatever it might be. You could write that on your calendar, that I'm sorry if you can hear a bird. It's
He's got something to say.
I'm so sorry, it's done now. But so that's a nice resource for families, I hope. I'm going to print one out and it'll help them count down to Lent and maybe put some of those mission or service projects, they can write them in the calendar. And that will be available soon. And it'll be on my website under free resources.
That's wonderful. I love how you've just taken just that knowledge you have of teaching children back in your previous life, as you said, and really provided ways for kids to engage with the book in lots of different ways, whether they can write or color themselves, or even just putting a sticker on a sheet to get excited about Easter coming. And I love that idea of finding service opportunities in random acts of kindness to do in the Lenten season, because we talk about it a lot during Advent, but to include the same sort of mission and love that Jesus displayed in his whole ministry during that season of Lent, to really invite people in to what God was doing in just Jesus' ministry and what he wants to accomplish even now when in our own hearts, because Jesus still wants to be a part and still wants to be with the lonely and the lost and that kind of thing. So I love that you have provided those things. Now,
thanks.
So fun. Now, Glynis, what is one of your favorite Easter books?
That's a great question. Well, before I became an author, I was serving in children's ministry. After I was a teacher, I became a children's ministry director. And one of my jobs was to choose, look at Bibles for the children. And I think it was like 2000, a Bible came out called the Jesus Storybook Bible. And I see you nodding your head, and all your listeners, it's right there on your shelf. It's right there on my shelf. And I love Sally Lloyd-Jones anyway, because she's a Brit like me. She's a writer like me. She lives in America like me, so we do have things in common. But I've always loved her writing. She writes a lot of secular books. She's so funny. But the way she wrote those stories. So I remember going to the bookstore and, this is a new Bible. I'm going to see what this is all about. I couldn't put it down, Valerie, because the way she writes is so beautiful. And she was my inspiration for writing my first book, which was a book of Bible stories called Love Letters from God. So she wrote a book, and it's not specifically religious, but it is if you're a Christian, and it's called Bunny's First Spring. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but It's just a sweet, sweet story about this bunny who is, I guess, depressed because it's winter time, and he wonders, like, will spring ever come? Will there ever be anything new? And so it really is kind of about new life and resurrection and hope. And so for me, that is one of my favorite Easter books, although you might not find it if you Googled Easter books. But Sally Lloyd Jones, Bunny's First Spring. It's really a sweet story.
It does sound sweet. I love how just spring itself does lend to the idea of new life and resurrection and coming out of winter. I know we're getting cold here. I'm in Texas, so it doesn't, not quite as cold because I think you're up in Minnesota. Is that right? Or Michigan?
Almost in Michigan. And
Michigan.
yes,
I was like, one of the M's up there, right?
there is snow outside my window, yeah.
Yes, so no snow here, but we don't like snow. We get ice. So it is that coming out of that season of cold and, things seem lifeless and without hope. And it's fun to find books that speak into that, even in the secular market, that you can still take and be like, this is really about Jesus. So I love those types of books. What has been the most impactful book in your life, Glennis, other than the Bible?
Well, the Bible would be my number one. Oh my gosh, the most impactful book. Well, when I lived in England and my children were little, their favorite book of all time, which is still on my bookshelf, and I bought it like 50 years ago, but it's still being published, Valerie. I don't know if you've heard of it, but again, it was the inspiration for that first book, along with Sally Lloyd Jones' Bible. My Love Letters from God book I wrote it because of this book. It was published in 1984, and it was called The Jolly Postman. Have you ever heard of it?
No, I don't think I have.
Well, you have to just Google it because it's still selling, and at Christmas you can get The Jolly Christmas Postman. It was a book of, and because I was a teacher, I was always looking for fun books to read to my class, but it was all about this little, so not at all religious, but just so brilliant for anybody who loves children's literature or who aspires to write for children. He wrote it in rhyme, and it's about this postman in England who rides his bike delivering letters, but he's delivering letters to nursery rhyme characters. And it's so clever, Valerie. It's so creative and innovative because not only was that premise brilliant, but the actual book, so the pages are real envelopes with an address on and a stamp, and you can put your hand inside and take the letter out. And so the first one is addressed to the Three Bears cottage in the woods, and it's an apology note from Goldilocks to the Three Bears.
That's amazing.
I know. And so can you see how clever and innovative? And I just remember my kids, sitting on my lap, and they'd put their hand, they always wanted to be the one to take the letter out and unfold it. And that's why I wrote my first book, Love Letters from God, which has Love Letters from God in it,
Right, because you kind of took that envelope idea, and each page has a little letter you can take out. That's amazing.
Right. So that really was a pivotal book in my life. I didn't know it then. I just knew this is a great book, and it's creative and fun to read. And I never knew that all these years later, so it was, I don't know, over 25 years later, when I just felt like God whispered to me a book of Bible stories and put letters from me, so you just never know, do you, Valerie, these little things that happen in your life or conversations that might later on God uses in a greater way. How
fun. I'm going to have to look that book up and add it to my shelf for sure. It sounds lovely.
Yeah, and I mean, 1984, and still it's sold like 7 million copies, and I still see it in Barnes & Noble at Christmas. The Jolly Postman by Janet and Alan Alberg. They're the authors, yeah.
I will definitely have to look that one up. Glennis, what can we expect next from you?
Oh, thanks for asking that. So I'm super excited because on April the 2nd, I'll be releasing my first book with a publisher called Paraclete Press, and it is called Song of the Seasons. It's a rhyming book, because I love to write in rhyme, and it's just inspired by Psalm 98, where we have this lovely idea that all the earth sings God a brand new song. And I'm a lover of nature and walking and trees, especially trees. I do love trees. And I don't know, to me, have you ever watched like when all the leaves are like rustling in the wind and you can hear them? And my brother taught me that the word for that is Cytherism. Is that cool?
It's a
I love
unique
that
word.
word, Cytherism. It begins with a PS. But so that Cytherism is when the trees, when the leaves all shake. And so to me, that's always like the trees singing for God, And so it's about two kids and they're riding through the seasons. So it goes through spring and summer and fall and winter. And just the idea that all creation is singing God a brand new song. So I'm super excited, and I think, will we get to chat about that title too?
I think we will. I think we just might have to.
Oh, well, thanks. That would be so great. Yeah.
I look forward to hearing more about that because I am a nature lover myself too, so I can't wait to see both illustrations and your lovely rhymes and how you weave the song of God into it all.
Oh.
Now, where can people find out more about you, Glynis?
So they can just visit my website. It's just glenysnellist.com. I'm going to spell it for you, Valerie, for your listeners, because I know it's an unusual name.
It's a beautiful name.
I'm the only Glenys Nellist in the world, if you can believe that. On Facebook, there's only one me. So it's a good name for an author. It's Glenys, Glenys, and then Nellist is Nellist. Yeah, that's me. And my name rhymes. That must be why I like to write.
It's all set up. You just didn't know it. So fun. Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Glynis, and I can't wait to talk to you more about your book that's coming out in April.
Oh, thank you so much for having me, Valerie. It was a joy.
It is a pleasure. And thank you for joining Glynis and me on this episode of the BookWorthy podcast. Check the show notes for any books or links that we discussed, and let us know in the comments what's your favorite part of Lent. How do you celebrate it, or what's your favorite tradition? Be sure to like and subscribe so we can discover more great books together. Happy reading.